So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Andy Scarter. The interesting part is, for those of you that do, my name is still Andy Scarter, but there we go. At a certain point in my life, I had the unbelievable privilege of managing a Christian rock band in the United States. In that period, I was kind of seeking God on what the rest of my life would look like and where I was going to be living. And as you can probably tell, I'm not an American. I don't have an Australian accent. I'm a South African by birth. And although I enjoyed being in the United States, it never felt like that was where I was going to end up permanently. And I spent some time in prayer just saying to the Lord, I'd really like you to show me, where I'm going to live and where I'm going to settle, because I'd like to do that. And the way he did that, strangely enough, was through a dream. And in this dream, he very clearly gave me a picture of a cityscape. And he basically said to me, this is where you are going to settle. And at that point in time, I was living in Nashville, Tennessee. And the picture he gave me was of a cityscape with a river in front of it. That was the memory I had of it. And of course, as soon as I got back from that trip, I went and looked at Nashville from every angle over the river, and I couldn't get the picture to line up. Anyway, kind of, slightly puzzling, as God sometimes is. And I got on with my life. I happened within the next 6 or 7 months to move to Singapore. And in Singapore, of course, we have an island with a river. And I thought, this must be it. And I jumped on a charter boat and I headed out to sea, and I looked back at the city over the river, and it wasn't it. And I kind of figured, well, all right, so we're not there yet. In my business dealings at that point, I was traveling all over Asia. Asia's full of cities, Asia's full of rivers. Everywhere that I went that I could get on a boat, I went and looked at the cityscape from across the river, and it was never ever the picture that God had given me. About 5 years later, so we're now talking around about November 2010, I was given the opportunity to move from Singapore to Australia. Ended up in a bed and breakfast in Manly for the final weekend of the trip, sitting in the bed and breakfast over breakfast, looking at my phone, trying to decide what to do for the rest of the day. And I noticed there was this big green space on the map that said North Head, which meant nothing to me, but anyway, it looked like somewhere I could go for a walk. Checked out of the bed and breakfast, jumped into my rental car, drove up onto the North Head, went for a walk, and at the end of that walk sat on a park bench in front of my rental car to enjoy the view. Now, at that point, everything changed, because all of a sudden, sitting looking across from the North Head towards the city of Sydney, there I saw the exact picture that God had given me. And I went back to Singapore, commenced the process to apply for a visa to come to Australia, was issued a 457 business visa for 4 years, and arrived in Sydney very happy because it had with it a path to citizenship after 2 years. So all I had to do was live in Australia for 2 years, don't go to jail, pay my taxes, and I could apply for PR. And 2 years later, I could then apply for citizenship, which was absolutely perfect. Unfortunately, the law changed within the 2 years. And because I was on an offshore sponsored visa, that was no longer a pathway to permanent residence. So now I'm sitting in a situation that God has told me that I'm going to be living in Sydney, but I don't have an employer in Sydney anymore. Eventually got to the end of that 4-year period and applied for PR. And was told when we applied for PR that it would take a maximum of 11 months. 15 months later, we'd still had no response. Virtually given up on it, come up with a plan B, because I must have misheard the Lord. I must have misunderstood what he said. Working on plan B, out of the blue, application for permanent residence has been approved. Now, this is on the back of hours and hours and hours of the East's unbelievably supportive Connect group, praying, interceding, fasting, you name it. On top of that, we've done everything that we can legally to get this to happen, and now eventually it's come to fruition. I had to wait a year before I could apply for citizenship. I did that on the day that I could apply for citizenship, and as soon as I had submitted my application, I got back a message saying, we've received your application. The current waiting time is 22 months for processing of citizenship applications. I figured that's how long it takes, that's how long I'll have to wait. 2 weeks later, I received a letter from the Department of Immigration to say that my citizenship application had been approved. 2 weeks later. In that letter, they told me that the next step would be a citizenship ceremony, and at the moment the waiting time for those was 7 months. 6 weeks after that, I was invited to a physical, not Zoom, physical citizenship ceremony with the Mayor of Lane Cove and our local representative, and on the 18th of August this year, I became an Australian citizen. All of this story is really to say to you, this essentially took a decade to come to fruition. There were many, many times where not only I, but a lot of people around me believed that I must have misheard the Lord. But the reality is I can sit here today and tell you categorically 1 Corinthians 1:9 is 100% spot on. That scripture, paraphrasing it, but basically it says you can trust God because He is faithful to deliver what He has promised.